We are extremely pleased to have Le Mounois as the speaker for our Mitchell Hochberg Public Education event. Le Mounois is an internationally renowned Chinese-American documentary filmmaker, author, educator, community therapist, and master diversity trainer. He is the executive director of Stir Fry Seminars and Consulting, which is a diversity training company. They provide educational tools and workshops on cross-cultural communication and awareness, mindful facilitation, and conflict mediation techniques. In 1995, Oprah Winfrey did a one-hour special on Le Mounois' life and his most famous documentary about racism, The Color of Fear. In 2014, he did a lot of stuff in between. I'm getting the highlights. In 2014, he released his latest film, If These Halls Could Talk, which focuses on college students speaking about diversity issues within higher education. One of my earliest exposures to thinking about diversity issues was from Rodgers and Hammerstein's South Pacific. It was the song, "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught." Here are the lyrics. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are oddly made and people whose skin is of a different shade. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. Le Mounois believes that each of us must take a stand and, quote, personally participate in this important journey of confronting our fears and beginning a conversation not only with those we love, but also with those we have been taught to fear. Paraphrasing from what he wrote in a recent newsletter, each year I wonder, what will it take for us to unlearn the fears and stereotypes that we've learned and cultivated in almost every facet of our lives? What will it take to end racism in this country? Perhaps it will take believing that every person and child is our own. The real question is, are we willing to act out of love and compassion? Are we willing to see and treat each person as we would someone who was in our own family? His lecture today is titled, Walking Each Other Home, The Art of Creating Community and Connection. Please join me in welcoming Le Mounois.
Somebody asked me today when I was in the elevator, how did I feel about today? And what I said was I was really nervous. And each person who I shared this with, who asked me how I was doing, some people said, well, you shouldn't be nervous. You know, in the Army, it's good to be scared. But what I noticed that not one single person asked me why I was scared. Except you. The last person I met in the elevator. And she said, you know, you probably should be. And we looked at each other for not maybe the reasons why you might have thought, but because so many times I faced predominantly white audiences. And I wonder to myself, can I tell the truth? Will you understand the truth? And when we were talking a little bit about it in the elevator, she goes, absolutely. And so today, when I begin, I have not written my speech. I have lived it 69 years of my life. And at this one point in my life, right here at this moment, I want to ask you a question. How many of you are here today because you would love a world in which everyone is honored and valued for who they are? Raise your hand. How many of you believe that it's really important to meet people who are different so that we could learn a world outside of our own? Raise your hand. So now take a good look at who you're sitting next to. And then maybe there might be some people that you don't know, and you've already put something on their chair between the two of you. And by the way, this happens again and again. You see, in my newest film, If These Halls Could Talk, the students talk about that their parents did not have to say a single word what racism was. All they had to watch was their faces when someone different sat next to them. All they had to do was watch how their parents looked nervous when they started to take their belongings and move them closer underneath their chair. Or maybe what I learned was when my father was in the car, what he did was he goes, "Okay, everybody, roll your windows down." And then we looked at what neighborhoods he was talking about. You see, he learned it without telling us a single word. I am here today because I'm going to do a different workshop for you today. I am not going to lecture you about what it takes to create community. Because in my latest film, the black student Mark says, at any given moment, I could lose my life. 4 years after I took to do this film, he came to my premiere. He had told the president of his school that he was going to get his office set up because he's going to need that office for him. And in fact, 4 years after he graduated, the president had an office ready for him because he was so bright and credible. And at the end of my premiere in Oakland, California, he took one of the cast members home. He was never heard of again. You see, one day later, his body was found burned alive in the trunk of his car. He was the third black young man burned in his trunk in Chico, California. And someone said, "You do know we have a chapter of the Ku Klux Klan here." He was walking down the middle of the road with his white girlfriend. The police saw no connection. And so today it is with a heavy heart that I cannot simply talk to you about racism, because it's alive and well for me. And for every student who was in my film, they will never forget that experience. It's not Michael Brown over here. It's someone they loved and they cared about. And so I can do no less today. So I would like you all to stand. Martin Luther King once said that if we don't stand up for something in our lives, then we don't have a life worth living. And so what I would like you to do is this. I know you're comfortable. I know you're familiar with someone you're sitting next to. But today what I would like you to do is to model for this next generation and maybe for your colleagues. I would like you to pair up with someone you don't know who's different than you. Now, I know that you could fake me out and go like this, "Okay, Michael, it's just, we're not moving. He can't tell." I've got a photographic mind and memory, okay? So I'd like you to look around, come out of your row, and pair it with someone you don't know and who's different than you. And one more thing, no words at all. And for some of you, that might be very difficult as therapists, okay? So look around the room, pair it with someone you don't know and who's different than you. Okay. Now, take a good look at your partner. You ever have people check you out? You ever check out people in the elevator and make all sorts of assumptions? You ever go by neighborhoods and make lots of assumptions? Yeah, it happens all the time. I do not believe any of us in this room don't have assumptions. In fact, you probably have tons about me already, don't you? Yeah. In fact, a lot of people who saw me wearing this today, some people went like this. But no one asked me, what does that mean to you? What does it feel like to wear this? Or once I had a necklace that had Om on it, and an Indian man walked up to me and he goes, what is that? And I said, it's a necklace. Do you know what it means? And I said, Om. And I could tell he was offended that I was wearing it. And then he looked at me and goes, tell me what it means. And then I looked at him and I knew that he was Indian, and I said, I could never put it into words. And then he put my hand on my shoulder and he goes, so you do know. Do you see, in the Western culture, we would immediately answer, wouldn't we? A definition that we read up, or maybe Siri helped us with it. But I knew when I looked at his eyes, there was an offense that he felt. When you wear that, do you know what it means to my people? And so when you look at this person who's in front of you, today when you begin, I would like you to check them out. Take a good look at them. Look at their shoes. Take a good look. She's got gorgeous shoes. Look at that. Now take a look at the necklaces. Now take a look at the hair, the eyes, the lips. And we all know, when I worked with Disney Studios, they put a line for Asian eyes, and how that deeply affected me, and how children saw me when I was at school. Or how African Americans were deeply affected with huge noses with rings on them. Or if you take a look at Jungle Book, how all the monkeys and the apes and the gorillas had black accents. And the important and dignified leader was an elephant who had an English accent. All of those deeply affect us. How we see ourselves and how we see others. It is ingrained in our very society. So what it means is, how do we break that? So what I would like you to do is, now that you've looked at your partner, I would like you to tell your partner one assumption that you've made about your partner by simply looking at them. Now, this is what you're going to do. And it might be, as like many students did to me when I was a teacher, was the first black student who met me when I went to elementary school went like this as a first-year teacher. Ha! And I looked at that little boy, because it was the time of Bruce Lee, who made me dangerous and challenging. And I said, not bad, grasshopper. I'll show you some more moves after school. And then what happened was, this big black kid at the door, he must have been 5'10" already, and he goes, I heard you say you were bad. I said, no, I really didn't. And then he came running towards me full speed. And I had the look that looked like this. And that's the martial arts look for fear. And as he came towards me, he tripped on the first desk and knocked himself out. And then I leaned down and I said, are you okay? And he said, yeah. Oh. And I said, what's your name? He goes, Mark. And I said, Mark, are you okay? And he goes, don't tell anybody I tripped. Tell them you flipped me. And I said, yes, I think I could do that. And so I became legendary throughout the whole school. And some kids even did like this, bowed to me when I went down the halls, a first-year teacher, and all these tenure teachers were going, what did he do? Now, in the beginning, it was a lot of fun. But after a while, I realized that all they saw me as was the second coming of Bruce Lee, and that was it. What they didn't see was my emotions and my intelligence, my softness, my inconsistencies, my fears. They didn't go further. And so I think we make assumptions about people all the time, don't we? So what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to look at your partner and tell them one assumption you have about them just by looking at what they're wearing. And then I'd like you to check out to see if it's true or not. Can you hear that? Because that's the only way you'll break assumptions. And the only way you'll break an assumption about this president is to ask him one day, I hope before he resigns or he finishes his term, President Barack Obama, what has it been like to be a black man and president of the United States? How has it changed you? And every night when you go home, what do you say to your wife? Because I think we lost a phenomenal opportunity to see what it was like to be a black man in America and President of the United States. And so today, when you're facing this person, they are who they are, aren't they? And they are waiting for someday someone to tell them what they see when they're looking at you. And I want you to be truthful. Because in my newest film, the white gay student who looks at the black student and says, okay, I'll be honest. I don't see you as a human being. I see you less than a human being. And in one of my more recent workshops working with therapists, I asked them to honestly tell me how many of them have ever thought that people of color were less than human. And every one of them raised their hands. And you know what the black student said when he said that? What's new? You're just the first person who's ever said it out loud. And make no mistake that Donald Trump, who is leading all the polls, when President Barack Obama won the presidency of the United States, he asked to see his homework. He did not believe he was smart enough to be the head of the Harvard Law Review. And what do you think he must have felt? And every black student in this country thinking you're the President of the United States and you still get asked to show your homework. And if you do not know that story, why not? Because in the film, the young black man says, the way they treated him, what chance do I have? So what we said and what we did not say affected so many young people. And today we have got to begin to be honestly sharing how we feel so we can begin from there. Inclusion is a wonderful word, but we first must face our exclusion, what we are afraid to see and talk about. So look at your partner. Tell them one assumption you made on them based on looking at them, whatever that is, and then check out to see if it's true. Ready, begin. Now, raise a hand if most of your assumptions were right. Raise your hand if some of them are right. And by the way, the only way you'll be able to know if your assumptions are right or wrong is you're going to have to ask the person, as well as get to know them, huh? Now, I'm going to show you an exercise that you can actually do. And by the way, these assumptions I'm going to be taking to Ferguson. I'm going to be working with the police department and the residents of Ferguson to sit down with each other and first share 3 assumptions that they've made about each other and check them out. Imagine what that would be like. Because President Clinton had the national dialogue on race and not one single person talked to each other. Just to a panel. And we call that a dialogue. And so today, I'm also going to share with you 4 questions that you could ask that all of my life as an Asian therapist, educator, facilitator, and filmmaker, that I had wished that one of my instructors had asked me. That even though I was nominated the most outstanding graduate in my university, I felt they still didn't get to know who I was, other than I did a famous film called The Color of Fear that was on Oprah Winfrey. Because once again, I was more than my film. And this was the question that I wished I could have been asked. What we do not see. When others look at you, what do they see? When others look at you as an Asian person, as a white person, Latino, Mexican, immigrant, older, younger, gay, straight, when they look at you, what do they see? I want you to know how many places I walk into in some of the most professional places and watch people's smiles drop when they see me. Or maybe sometimes United States Air Force, some doing this when I walk in with no fear at all. Or what it was like having to have some of my teachers share about being Asian and the kids going, as if they're mimicking the Asian language. Or maybe the worst insult of all sometimes is having born my entire life in Oakland, California. My God, you speak such good English. Where'd you learn it from? Or maybe when I did well. My God, you're a challenge. You're a credit to your people. All the things I never heard my white counterparts ever have to hear. So when others look at you, what do they see? What don't they see and why? What do you wish that they would see? God, I think that's why when the young black student said in my newest film, this is the only place where I could be heard without a doctorate. What a shame. And the last one is, if others wanted to get to know the real you, what do you need or want from them for that to happen? What would it take? Many of you are looking at me and going, wow. Interesting questions, aren't they? Because they might get to the heart of who you are. An experience that might be outside of your own. And so the person who's going to start will be the person with the shortest hair. Ready, begin. So once again, as a Asian, Latino, etc., you're going to answer these questions. As a white person, as an older, younger. Ready, begin. So how many of you told the truth? Lie, lie, lie. Okay. So by the way, for some of you who have never had to think about what it would be like when people looked at you, how many of you can relate sometimes that the whole room changes when you walk in a room sometimes? Raise your hand. Yeah. And sometimes wonder, what is that look? What is that all about? This one gentleman shared about what it's like to be a Jew. And you may not even know that unless you ask him. In fact, maybe he will stop wearing the Star of David out loud. Can you hear that? What we can learn about a person's journey to this room could surprise you. And how it might change the way you see them. Now take a good look at your partner again. I'm going to show you what the art of mindfulness looks like. And as a therapist, it should be very easy. I'd like you to think of 2 or 3 things your partner said. And today we talked about today, didn't we? That when someone shares something with you of what it's like to have people sometimes look at you strangely or maybe less than. Today I did that with a group of women. And when I was finished, one of them asked me some questions. And then I said, but how do you feel about what I said? How do you feel about what I said? And sometimes we don't share that and how it affected us. And so I'd like you to tell your partner, ask your partner, tell your partner one thing you heard them say that deeply touched you. And what you could do is how I get people to talk all over the country, which is not only relating to them back what they said, but I heard you say, tell me more. What angered you about that? What hurt you? what's familiar, which is the past tense question. And then the last one is always, what do you need or want? Did you know that not one single presidential candidate has ever been curious about what the other person said? All they do is make statements, adversarial, in denial, in defense, or they change the topic, or, like Sarah Palin, you have 10 answers for any question that exists. And I think that that's why today we're begging. That's why Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders didn't know what to say to the Black Lives Matter folks except an answer. I was longing for Hillary to look at the Black Lives Matter folks and say, it must be so painful to have to yell and scream before we'll even listen. Why didn't we do it in your classrooms? Why didn't we do it in your communities? Why didn't we bring counseling and groups into your communities? Why did we only wait until there was a crisis, till someone dies or someone gets shot? Or why didn't we believe it until someone videoed it? I would have longed for her to sit down and Bernie to say, I have so much to learn as a white woman, as a white man. Just as Robert F. Kennedy and John F. Kennedy were faced by Andrew Young and Martin Luther King when they said they were going to march on Washington. And John F. Kennedy said, no, you've got to wait. It'll scare the white legislators. And Martin Luther King looked at John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and said, we are in the streets and we are coming. And Robert says, you've got to understand. You've got to be patient. And Andrew Young looked at Robert F. Kennedy and said, shut up and sit down. You have so much to learn. And Robert F. Kennedy recounts what that did in his life when he was asked to listen. And like Muhammad Gandhi, he said, I must travel this country because there is a world I do not know about, not in my world. And today I'm giving you a glimpse of what it would be like to ask somebody whose world knows what this is like. Tell me more. It must have been so hard. What angered you about that? What hurt you about it? And that what's familiar means it might even be that it has happened since I was a child. What did it mean today when my whole life has been about today? What does that mean? And as I look at my brother right here, who almost has tears in his eyes as he looks at me, he knows what I'm talking about. And it is that connection that I long for in my classes. It was in my eyes, and perhaps even his, when I wanted to learn about an Asian therapist. I wanted someone to ask me, how would I have done it as a Chinese man? How would I have taught differently? How would I have done therapy differently? And I wanted to be believed. And I wanted that person to be curious. And I wanted them to say, what I have learned today will change my life. And that was a world I think those Black Lives Matter were wanting to hear. Do I matter? And today, when you open this person up by asking these questions, what you would discover are questions they've been wanting to answer all their lives. What angers you about what's going on in your life? What hurts you as a black person? You see, that need or want is the one we've all heard, but we don't believe we'll get it. And that's why I'm giving you these. These are simply 5 out of 52 that I wrote that changed the face of therapy. That students of color in education and in therapy have said to me, oh my God, where were these when I was training? And that's why I'm sharing them with you. Because too many lives have died. And dying doesn't mean that you physically die. Dying means that you could sit where Dr. Bob is sitting here right now. As one student said, I died, but the teacher didn't even see it. And that is the spirit I'm trying to give them back. you as therapist must ask these questions, must go deeper, must be curious. Because they are not just human beings. Their color, their gender, their sexuality, their age, their class affects them every single day in this country. And not a day goes by when a minority is not killed or beaten or abused one more time. And if you stop crying, if you stop looking around, what part of you will have been lost to? So look back at your partner and ask them these questions. I was really touched, or I was really moved when you talked about, and ask them to tell you more. Ready, begin. Now what I'd like you to do is, I'd like you to switch. And one of the things I want you to keep in mind is this. Before we switch, I'd like you to ask you by raise of hands, how many of you thought your partner was a good listener? Was a good listener? You better say that, huh? So what made your partner a good listener?
She listened.
Now, you might be laughing, but actually, it's really important to ask him a much deeper question is, in what way did you know she listened?
I felt she understood what I said.
And how did she show that she understood what you said?
It's not as simple as she repeated it back, but I had the feeling that I'd gotten through to her.
By the way, what he's also saying is not just the words, but also physically when she was leaning in. And I noticed when you leaned in, so did she. And there was a way in which they were met in the middle. Today I met Chris. She was one of the maybe the seventh person I met here. But there was something about her eyes, the way she welcomed me. I said that to you, didn't I? And there was something I saw. And then she said to me, I had spent a lot of time in Asia. And I said, that must account for it. Because when you looked at me, I felt like you saw me. Like there was a connection. And then she had another woman come up. And then when I was talking to her, she goes, so how do you know that I was listening? And I said, because you never once in your eyes closed down. How many of you know when someone's there with you? You can feel it, can't you? It's almost indescribable. And yet, sometimes you could see that vacancy in the eyes, can't you? Where you wonder, why am I doing this? And do they believe me? And then sometimes I've been bold enough, you could probably guess I'm fairly bold. I once asked this person, do you believe me? And he goes, what makes you think that? Of course I do. And I said, I don't know. Because the left side of your lip is quivering when you just said that. I have a feeling that you were lying to me, but you were afraid to tell me the truth. And he goes, okay, I don't agree with you. And I said, I already knew that. I was just wondering if you knew that to tell yourself. You see, sometimes we speak with two tongues, don't we? And we're praying that someone doesn't see that that's happening. You see, I think that student who says, I see black people as less than human, began a friendship with somebody. Because now we can start from where that came from. Can you hear that? I think we're scared to say those things. I'm not afraid of Donald Trump. Because you know why? I'd rather hear it out loud. I think we won the Civil War, but lost the hearts. We thought we just won one part. The rest of it is hard work, isn't it? To get to know each other. Now, I know that we could also go to the second person. How many of you would like to answer the questions or would rather not? Good. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to continue talking. because I would like you, after we finish this, is to connect with this person. How many of you would be willing to do that? After this talk, connect with this person. Some of you going, I don't know, I was going to go home. I was going to go like this, I guess. Because I would like to propose to you that they're waiting for you to ask them these questions. And if you've never had to feel like what it's like to be different, I would like to tell you that I taught for 25 years. Special ed before I became a therapist. And when I saw the look in my children's eyes, I could see that they thought they were stupid. And when I met with them, what I said to them is not that you can't learn. It's just that we haven't figured out a way to teach you. What I want to tell you is that I learned and watched them very carefully by going out into the schoolyard, even when I wasn't in supervision. And what I learned from those children of color was that they all learned very differently. And I learned that we never adapted our curriculum for black kids, Latino kids, Asian kids to even notice. And when I started to do therapy, what I started to realize is that we are so vastly different. That I wanted to tell people that when I was a Chinese therapist, and I still am, is that I track much more carefully than most people do. I track people because in the Chinese culture, the moment I'm in this room, I must respect everything I see in you to make sure you're comfortable, listening, feeling responsive, because I put you before myself. And in my classes, I never spoke first. Why? To make sure that everyone had a chance to speak. In the Western culture, what I noticed was that people would not only raise their hands, they talk at the same time and interrupt. And they call that a dialogue. 3 or 4 people doing the same thing. And then call that everyone talk. What do I do as a Chinese man, as a therapist, when I'm doing group work? Is I don't have people raise their hands. After you finish talking, I have you look at somebody else in the room and you get to choose the next person. I remember when I did that in Hawaii, these 2 Asian women started talking. And then the superintendent go, I didn't know you 2 spoke English. And they were, of course, insulted. And one of them said to the superintendent, well, that's because you never once asked us any questions. And the other one said, well, you never knew we spoke English because you never stopped talking. Which was interesting, wasn't it? And when I was in my classroom, I asked my students to tell me their real name. When I work with clients, I ask them to tell me my real name. How many of you went to the reception that we had up in the presidential suite? How many of you, and you got to watch me when we were with the waiter, didn't you? The waiter walked up and he was Asian. I go, so what's your name? He goes, Jack. What an Asian name. And then I said, are you Chinese? And he goes, yes. I think he might have been Vietnamese, I'm not sure. And then I said, so what's your Vietnamese name? You see, and he started saying Zhang. And what I said was, and he ended up to be Chinese Vietnamese. And so I'm sure that he said Zhang, and someone said, we'll call you Jack for short. Do you see how that began? And then there were a number of people came up to us, and I think one was possibly Jamaican. And then what I said was, I just love the Jamaican people. And you should have seen the look on his face. Because I had been to Jamaica. And in Jamaica, there is music everywhere, just like now. And one moment I started to say that, my body language changed when I was with him. And then he began to talk. You know how I get cab drivers to talk to me, to tell me their whole lives, besides telling them I'm a therapist? Is I'm in a cab and they're going like this. And they're talking to me and I go, woo, what a beautiful accent. And he goes like this, really? And what they mean by that is, no one's ever said that. No one's ever said that their accent is beautiful. Or maybe the Harvard Peruvian professor who was talking and I said, what an honor to meet another American. And he cried. Because it was the first time he was called an American in this country. And what that felt like. I wanted to say to Donald Trump, yes, Ted Cruz is an American. He's Canadian. You're absolutely right. And when Best Buy said to me, how do I get a contract with Best Buy? In Mexico, I said, go up to the Mexican person who meets you and just simply do this. What an honor to meet another American. And they immediately got the contract. Another world of seeing them. Or maybe today, when Chris and I were talking, a number of other people going to other countries, and I said, how much of the language do you know? The United States makes it a law to speak English. Makes it an official language of our country. Yet when we go to France, when we go to Japan, we ask them to all speak English. Interesting, huh? We take our self-centeredness no matter where we go. How many of you know the words and the ethnicities of your clients? How many of your clients know your European heritage? How many school teachers have ever adorned their classrooms, or counselors, with their European heritages? And if you don't, do you know that what happens is your white students get embarrassed to talk about their heritage? And so they attack students of color. Why do you want to bring that up? Because they're scared because they don't know theirs. And they haven't had any of their professors.
I'm feeling scared because I have the
Oh,
horrible
okay.
job of stopping you.
I'll take 1 minute, okay?
Okay.
To close. And so what I would like to share with you is this. Today I wanted to give you a glimpse of what it was like to ask some different questions. I would like you to bring your heritage into your therapy so that we as people of color can talk about it. I would like you, when racial incidents occur, ask your clients, what's it like to be having a white therapist on this day? What's it like to be a person of color when you start? And to share what you don't know so you could learn from your clients and not just always what we might tell to them. I would like to share with you today, in closing, one quote that I think is quite important. Martin Luther King once said that we hate each other because we fear each other. We fear each other because we don't know each other. And we don't know each other because we're separated. I hope that what you'll do is take the time to get to know each other. It starts with the waiters. It starts with someone who's sitting quietly at your table. Because sometimes, perhaps like myself, I'm looking for someone who looks like me. I've been looking for a long time. And today, when I talked to 3 different women who were white, I finally felt seen. I felt heard. And I was touched. And that was the beginning, I think.